so here we go. Here's the little guy right here. This is the pollen grain. And that's produced by the yellow part of the flower back there. The pollen grain is going to be transferred to the female part of the flower, which is right here in the middle. And it's going to land here on this part that I'm touching. And it's going to be sticky, so the pollen won't blow away. And then the little pollen grain is going to germinate. And he's going to dig a tube, and you can kind of see the tube. The tube is kind of represented by this orange part right here. It's going to grow a pollen tube down to where the female part of the flower is. Female reproductive cell is. So this is a pollen tube. Now, so on this one, those are the two things you have to know on the slide. There's a couple of other things that I kind of want to talk you through to kind of get ready for like lecture. Okay, we're going to talk more about this is reproduction basically in flowering plants. The pollen tube inside here are going to be two cells. All right? This cell, and you may or may not be able to distinguish them on your slide, and it's okay if you don't. I won't ask you these parts. I'll ask you this one or this one on the test. But you do have two other things in here. This little guy is called a tube nucleus. Okay? Tube nucleus, he is actually going to be the guy that grows the pollen tube. Then I'm going to have this other little cell here. We call this guy the generative nucleus. Alright, he's going to split. And he's going to split into two sperm cells. They're haploid. Okay? Got it? And it's going to grow all the way down to the female part of the flower there. Okay? So, let's look at the female part of the flower. Any questions about what a pollen grain and a pollen tube is? Okay. Now we're going to pick up here and talk about what's going on here with reproduction. Because again, plants are weird. Yes, ma'am?
That's a male.
That's male. Now we're going female. Here we go. Right here. Kind of move it out of the way. So ignore the labels. And we're looking at what is called the ovary. The ovary is this part of the flower deep down in here. Okay? So here my pollen has landed. It sticks. The pollen tube grows down. And I'm looking at this area down here, this swollen part called the ovary. What they've done is they cut the ovary in half. And we're looking down into it. Okay? Well, if it's an ovary, what's going to be made there?
Eggs.
Eggs. Okay, so look. This whole thing is an ovary. Okay, we've cut the ovary, and we're looking at it. It says whole thing, ovary. All right? My ovary is divided up into these sections. I've got 6 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Each one of these things is called an ovule. Okay? Ovaries make what? Eggs. So inside here, that's the one I want. Okay, so here's an ovule. Okay. Still look at the ovary. Inside the ovule, it's going to be a cluster of cells. Right about there that I've circled. We call that the embryo sac. The embryo sac has about 8 cells in it. Okay? 3 of them are important. You're not going to be able to pick out which is which, but I'm going to tell you, I'm explaining reproduction here, so I'm going to kind of draw them and show you. Alright, so we got an egg. One of the cells in here is an egg. Alright? 2 of the cells that are hanging around somewhere in here, close by. Those two cells are called polar nuclei. Okay? Then there's 5 other cells, but we don't care. All right? Now remember back when we talked about the male, we got those 2 sperm cells, right? Yes? One of those sperm cells is going to fertilize the egg. All right? So egg, which is haploid, plus sperm, which is haploid, equals what? A diploid zygote. Zygote is going to develop into the seed, and the seed will then germinate and grow into a new baby plant, correct? Got it? Still 2 in. Grins, what generation do you think that new baby plant's going to be? Do you think that's the sporophyte generation or the gametophyte generation? It's the sporophyte. Diploid and haploid should tell you right there. This is actually the sporophyte generation.
Wait, the zygote or the?
Zygote, when it develops into the new plant, like when you look at a rose bush, you're actually looking at the sporophyte generation. So again, every plant from ferns on, the plant that you see, sporophyte generation.
Okay.
All right, and remember we got this other sperm, right? The other sperm that's hanging around over there is going to fertilize those 2 polar nuclei. So I've got one fertilization event happening here. I've got a sperm, which is haploid, plus a sperm. Oh, no, not sperm. Plus a 2 polar nuclei. Okay, so plus a polar nuclei, which is haploid, plus another polar nuclei, which is haploid. What do you think that's going to give me as far as the number of ends? It's going to be 3 N. Whoa. We don't see that, do we? We do in plants all the time. We get something that's 3 N. The sperm plus the 2 polar nuclei is going to make something called endosperm. Okay?
And on like a lab test, how are you going to want us to know that what you're like pointing at is endosperm?
If I'm pointing to an egg cell and I say what would form if the sperm fertilized this egg, you should tell me it's a zygote. If the sperm fertilized 2 polar nuclei, what do you get? Okay, endosperm. All right, so in plants, angiosperms, okay, angiosperms. So the group we're talking about right now, the angiosperms, you get 2 fertilization events. We call it double fertilization. Okay? Different, not something that happens in what we think about as animals, right? Okay, got 2 fertilization events. The endosperm is actually going to be a nutritional tissue for the developing zygote. How many of y'all like coconut milk? Okay? If you use it and cook it, you're drinking endosperm. Okay? That's what it is. It's liquid endosperm. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
Can you tell the difference between the polar nuclei and the egg?
You can't. So I am not going to ask you to identify and label that cell, but I will ask it. I think what Leah asked the question is, or was it you that asked the question about, or was it Brittany?
It was me.
Okay, so Brittany asked the question on how would I ask it. If I said, if you fertilize the egg cell, what would you get? Your answer should be zygote. If you fertilize the polar nuclei, what do you get? You get endosperm. But you can't tell which one is the egg. You can speculate and say that one of these cells. So look, I'm going to show you. It's kind of busy up here. I'm going to tell you. Show you up here real quick. I'll go to a higher magnification. We'll talk more about this. So we'll talk more about this fertilization when we get to reproduction in plants. So this won't be the first time you hear this. So here's how this would go on the test here, okay? So let's go higher so we can see one of these little cells in here. in one of these little embryo sacs. All right, most likely, you see these two guys right here? Okay? Most likely, those are either going to be a polar nuclei or an egg cell. So if I were to point to this and say, if this egg cell was fertilized, what would you get? A zygote. If this were a polar nuclei cell and it was fertilized, what would you get? Endosperm. Okay?
So
That's how it would be
egg,
asked.
zygote, polar nuclei,
Endosperm.
and then double fertilization.
Where? Could be. Could be. It's just hard to tell. They all look the same. It's hard to discern them. There are pretty much 8 cells in there. 3 of them are going to be the ones used in that double fertilization event. You're going to get a zygote or you're going to get endosperm. Okay? All right, any questions?
Double fertilization, how would you guys that?
That's just the event that happens.
Okay,
I wouldn't
so I
ask
don't
that on
have
the
to
test
ask- okay.
necessarily. That's the event, that you've got a zygote forming and endosperm forming.
Okay.
Because you've got 2 sperm, that would be double fertilization. All right, any questions? All right, that is it.